Today, I'm going to tell you Martha's story, and unfortunately, it's not a happy one. Martha expects to lose her home, the home she's been in for over 50 years. The home which is fully paid off, by the way, and she expects to lose it either this year or the next. And it's precisely because of taxes. They are, in a sense, driving her out of the home that she's lived in for over 5 decades. The home that she raised her children in. The home that she got married in. The home that she loved and lost her husband in. And the only home that she's ever really known. And unfortunately, this is not just happening to her, but to hundreds, if not thousands of Americans as we speak. Now, this video will contain 3 parts. First, I'm going to tell you Martha's story, how she got to this situation. Second, I'm going to give you all the details, all the stats and all the numbers of what's going on and why it's happening. And third, I'm going to explain, in Martha's own words, what is most likely going to happen to her and her home. So, let's get started. Martha has lived in Montana almost all of her life. She moved there with her family when she was just 5 years old. And to respect your time, let's fast forward to when she was 18, just graduated, and had just met the man who would become the love of her life and eventually her husband. This man's name was Arnold. He was 5 years older than she, and at his young age had already established himself as a mechanic. Their love grew quickly, and over the next 2 years, talk of marriage became a very real thing. And of course, with marriage, a lot of the time comes children. And Arnold wanted to make sure that his children grew up loved and with a roof over their head. So at the age of 25, Martha at the age of 20, Arnold bought them their first home. Now, mind you, at the time, the median priced home in the United States was just about $35,000. And even in the now extremely expensive city of Bozeman, Montana, home values were nowhere near where they are currently. And that's because Bozeman has experienced a massive boom real estate-wise, with many wealthy out-of-state people moving to Bozeman, Montana. This has put a huge strain on the locals. Not just because when wealth moves in, the cost of living of everything goes up, but because how real estate taxes are structured and calculated in Montana. But before we dive into that data, let me set the scene for you. Arnold and Martha bought their first home in Bozeman in 1970. And when they bought their first home, I doubt they knew the wild ride they would experience over the next 50 years when it comes to the expansion in Bozeman, real estate appreciation, and unfortunately, taxes. Over the next few decades, both Arnold and Martha lived in that home. They had 2 kids in that home. And being a very traditional family, Arnold continued to work as a mechanic to provide for that home and for his wife and his kids. And Martha tended the home and loved the home and raised their 2 kids in that home. Now, Martha did tell me that her husband was as blue collar as they come. And they, as a family, were very traditional, even for the times. She told me that while Arnold was always able to provide, money was never exactly easy to come by. They were able to save a little bit each year, and with some basic investing, it did grow over time. They did have to dip into that savings, though, multiple times throughout the years to repair their home, to buy new cars, and to eventually put their kids through college. Luckily, though, their living expenses were always at or below the average for the nation. But that would change, increase really, little by little, as the years ticked by. And then, just a few years ago, in what felt like an instant, like a light switch, it would skyrocket to levels just simply unsustainable for Martha. Now, in order to understand what's going on, we need to talk about 2 things. One is specific to Bozeman, Montana, and the other is a very serious statewide problem. So first, briefly, Bozeman, Montana. This little town has experienced steady growth throughout its history. This really hasn't been a major problem. What really has, though, especially for the locals already living there, has been the massive influx of wealthy people since 2020. Since everything that happened in 2020, people wanted space, people wanted nature, and the people who could afford those things did. Bozeman, Montana became a target for out-of-state money. People with California money and New York money. These people moving from places with much more expensive real estate easily competed in the local Bozeman property market. And when there's a massive influx of demand and no surge in supply to counter it, prices go up. Way up. The median priced home in Bozeman in 2016, $350,000. In 2019, right before this mess happened, $460,000, which was at the time already way above the median. But today, the median priced home in the greater Bozeman area, $979,000, close to $1 million. Now, this story has been similar across the entire United States, but how property taxes are calculated in Montana, that's what's hurting locals, especially seniors like Martha. Property values for property taxes are reassessed every 2 years. And when you combine this with the meteoric rise in home prices across the country, really, but especially in areas like Bozeman that have been driven up by wealthy out-of-state inflows, you get numbers like this. The average property tax bill, for example, in Montana is expected to rise 21% this year when compared to last year. And homeowners from across the state can expect to pay anywhere from 11% to 35% more when compared to last year's bill. Not only that, but because of these massive increases in home prices, homeowners in Montana are now holding 47% of the real estate tax burden, compared to 42% last year. Basically, homeowners are fronting a larger portion of the tax burden when compared to commercial property owners who only saw their burden increase 1% from 22 to 23% this year. And industrial property owners, they saw their tax burden decrease to 23%, down from 28% last year. Basically, regular people are fronting more of the property tax burden when compared to professional commercial property owners. And yes, wealthy people who have purchased property in the area are also fronting part of that burden. But it is the regular locals who are hurting because of it, like Martha. And like a completely different man who recently went viral, pleading for a pause in tax increases. He explained how his property tax bill went from $895 to almost $8,000 in just a couple of years.
On Social Security, 68 years old, and working just to pay my taxes. My property taxes were $895 a year. Now, my property taxes are approaching $8,000 a year over the last couple of years. I worked the entire winter up on that mountain for $6,500 just to pay my property taxes.
He says that's basically like paying $700 per month to rent their property from the government. A home which he says he bought in 1995 and raised his children in. And that amount of money is not including a mortgage. That's with a paid off home. And unfortunately, the same exact thing is happening to Martha. Martha's husband passed away about 10 years ago, and unfortunately his passing was sudden. But after processing the grief and healing, Martha continued to live in their home. At first, it was difficult to live in the place where all the memories were made, but as she healed, it became an even more cherished place than it already was. It was her way, she says, of holding on to her husband even though he was gone. And through the grief, Martha had to navigate a new financial situation, one without a steady income. Up until the very end, Arnold was still working, more hands-off, of course, but he was still bringing in an income. After his passing, that, of course, changed. But with the help of her children, Martha figured out a safe monthly withdrawal that should last her about 20 years from the savings that her and Arnold were able to accumulate over the years. That, plus Social Security, a few years later, gave her a small income of about $2,000 per month. Not much, especially in today's world, but enough. At least she thought so at the time, especially since her home was paid off. And while she spent most of it every single month on food, bills, and the like, it always seemed to be enough at least until recently. A few years ago, she noticed her tax bill growing larger and larger, eating a slightly larger portion of her fixed income. And while she definitely worried, again, she was always able to manage. And then 2020 happened, and housing prices everywhere skyrocketed. Living costs, housing prices, and taxes skyrocketed in Bozeman. And that, unfortunately, brings us to today. Martha expects her new tax bill to be close to $5,000 this year. Just 3 years ago, the tax bill was a little under $1,000. Her total fixed income is right around $24,000 per year, which means just her property taxes, which used to account for only around 4%, will now account for more than 20% of her income. And that's money before income taxes. She says she will not be able to afford the new property tax bill. Plain and simple, there's no way. She says it's already been extremely difficult to make do these last 3 years because of inflation, on top of the already soaring living costs in Bozeman. Martha has no choice but to sell her property. And yes, she will make a significant portion from the proceeds because property values have risen so much. But that's not really the point. She's being forced out of her home precisely because of her tax bill. She's being forced to sell a home that she does not want to sell. For her, the memories made in that home are worth more than gold. And she hoped to pass the home one day to her children. I asked her what she was going to do, and she said, "What is there to do? I can't afford the tax bill on a home the value of mine, which means I would have to lower my standard of living and buy a much less expensive home, if I can even find one, just to stay in Bozeman. I'm being priced out and taxed out of the home that I've lived in for over 50 years, and I don't want to go." So, what is Martha going to do? I don't know, and she doesn't either.